My name is Bertha Rabesca Zoe. I'm the chief of Behchokǫ right now, and I'm I have my law degree from U of A, and I've been working in treaty areas for a long time, especially implementation and heading up intergovernmental relations and working closely with our treaty partners. So, with that, maybe we can get into the presentation. So I've been doing a lot of presentations around the country for a number of years, and the Tłı chǫ Agreement and the Tłı chȯ government has been in existence for about 20 years now. So my presentation will be mostly about the Tłı chȯ government and the agreement and the constitution that we have. I am a Tłı chȯ person, born and raised in my community of Behchokǫ, and I speak my language fluently. So that really helps with the work that I do. Next slide. So in 1921, Mufi was our selected to be the leader to sign the treaty for us in 1921. And so when he signed Treaty 11 in 1921, he made sure that what he said we follow to this day. And he said, "Di sanata di de nili di de na go to leni de asit agotu hal hunli ha nile," basically mean that we won't be restricted from our way of life. Next slide. So I'm not going to read word for word, but inherent right is not something that's new. As we all know that the Creator created the world for us and instructed us on how to live together in harmony with ourselves and with the animals and everything else that's here for us since time immemorial. And so it's not something that is granted by the Crown. We all, as First Nations, Indigenous people, have unique cultural identity, and but what those rights that we have is not, there's no specific definition on that. And so a lot of what we have given to us by our Creator is that includes, right to self-government, right to land, and how to practice our culture, way of life, and our language. Next slide. And so the Tłı chȯ inherent right, so our self-government is based on the traditional governance system of the Tłı chȯ. Everybody has some sort of a system or another, and when you really look at it or think about it, it's what has made us be here to this day. There was a semblance of some governance structure and system, whether it's patriarchal, matriarchal, whatever. It's always been there. In my presentation, I do a little note about Tłı chȯ cosmology. There is a Tłı chȯ cosmology that flows about how we used to, way back when, centuries ago, uh, living in harmony with the land and the animals and interchangeably to where we are today. And so Tłı chȯ unity is integral to the Tłı chȯ, and because we have one language, one culture, and one way of life. So the Tłı chȯ Agreement is an extension of what Mufi achieved for the Tłı chȯ people in 1921. Next slide. So just a brief, quick history about the Tłı chȯ. Mufi signed Treaty 11 in 1921. Before that, or after that, there was a big move in the Northwest Territories for the Dene Métis to get together to do comprehensive claims. So there was a negotiations for a number of years, but that didn't really happen, and so that kind of fell apart in 1990. And 1990, the Gwich'in signed their land claim agreement, and then 1992, the Sahtu signed. But we used 2 years of that to do exploratory period, what we were going to do as a people. And so in 1992, Tłı chȯ land claims negotiated started. In 1996, when the inherent right to self-government policy, federal policy was released, we included self-government in negotiations. And so we finished, and Tłı chŏ government effective date was August 4, 2005. So it's been a little over 20 years. Next slide. So just a brief on the Constitution Act of 1982. It's a federal act. And so Section 35, there's lots and lots of cases dealing with Section 35 that says that existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal people of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed. And then Section 35, subsection 3 just says that for great certainty, these treaty rights will include land claim agreements. Next slide. And so when the land claim negotiation completed and federal parliament passed Land Claim and Self-Government Act. So this act basically it just says that our agreement is recognized and that it's a land claim within Section 35 of the Constitution Act. Next slide. And so also, it also recognizes the agreement is valid and has force of law. So when you have something that's force of law, it recognizes the Tłı chŏ government as a government, and also that judicial notice will be taken of Tłı chȯ law. So this is very important that as an order of government, our laws are recognized in courts and that it's similar to other laws in Canada. Next slide. So the agreement, as I said, on August 4, 2005, was we see that as a formal recognition for the Tłı chȯ people or for the nation as a government. It's not something that was granted by the Crown, as I said. It's just a recognition of what we've always had, but it's just a formal recognition because now it's in an agreement. And so the agreement provides certainty in respect of rights relating to lands, resources, and governance. It is a three-party agreement between the Tłı chȯ, Canada, and GNWT. And so it also ensures that the language, culture, and way of life is preserved, protected, and promoted. One thing about land claim or self-government agreements is that the Indian Act is not applicable. It doesn't apply to the Tłı chȯ anymore. And so the band councils that existed at that time ceased to exist and is replaced by the Tłı chȯ government, which we see as a national government. So right now we have about close to 5,000 citizens. Next slide. So there are 27 chapters in the agreement. I'm not going to go through them all here, but I've just listed them. Next slide. So one of the big ones here is the chapter 7 that deals with how Tłı chȯ government is structured and all our self-governing powers and authorities listed in there. Another important one is chapter 8 that deals with Tłı chȯ community governments. And I'm briefly going to be touching up on those two. And the rest deals with like wildlife harvesting rights, compensation, management. So this is where the WCAG Land Resource Management Board comes in. Next slide. And continuing on with some of the chapters, the big one too here is Tłı chȯ lands that recognizes the 39,000 square kilometers of land we have in surface, subsurface. And the big one too is the Chapter 22, which deals with land and water regulation. And so this is where the integrated regulatory system in the Northwest Territories comes in. So the Mackenzie Valley Land and Water Board and the Mackenzie Valley Environmental Impact Review Board. So these are regulatory bodies that are recognized as a part of the integrated system we have in the Northwest Territories. So the WCAG Land and Water Board is from Chapter 22. Next slide. So these are just royalty regimes. Chapter 26 is a huge one, economic measures chapter that deals with procurement and working with government contracts and government's obligation for how they're going to help us become economically self-sufficient and to work with us on our traditional economies. Next slide. So the agreement, as I said, has the powers, Tłı chŏ government has the powers to enact laws in relation to all kinds of things, and it's all listed in Chapter 7. But the big one here is the structure of the Tłı chŏ government and its internal management. So it doesn't say this is how Tłı chŏ government is going to look. It just says that we have the power to make laws in how the Tłı chŏ government is going to be structured and how it's going to have its internal management. And then, of course, there's all the rights, exercise and management of those rights and benefits for the Tłı chŏ nation, the people, um, as well as protection of lands, renewable resources, and non-renewable resources. Next slide. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the the jurisdiction authorities that's listed under the agreement. The agreement is online, and you can look it up under Chapter 7. Just some of the things I'm going to mention here is the use of Tłı chŏ language, practice of traditional medicines, heritage resources, training, social assistance, including social housing. So those are some of the authorities that we can choose to exercise. It's available to us if we choose to one day. Next slide. And the other one is the Child and Family Services, and guardianship and trustee of Tłı chŏ adults and adoptions. Next slide. We also can exercise jurisdiction in education except post-secondary, preschooling and early childhood. So we've taken on preschooling and early childhood. We're working on wills and intestacy and administration of estates. And we can also certify people to teach the Tłı chȯ language and the history and culture of the Tłı chȯ. Next slide. So we can also do direct taxation of Tłı chȯ citizens on Tłı chȯ lands or in a community. And we have enforcement of laws that we have. We can enforce our laws. But again, as with anything, there's always limitations and conditions, and the agreement is no exceptions to that, to make sure that those are included. Next slide. The Tłı chȯ agreement, in addition to jurisdiction authorities in a whole bunch of areas, identifies 3 geographical areas. And I put on here to always remember that the Mufi Guade Nitle that's in the agreement is just there for illustrative purposes. It's not really the actual legal description boundaries. The legal description boundaries is laid out in Chapter 2, I think. Next slide. So the first map here you see is Mufi Guade Nitle, which is the traditional territory of the Tłı chȯ. I really don't know the square kilometers of this area. It's quite massive. If you see the map, it goes into the Satu and into Nunavut and all along the eastern north shore of Great Slave Lake, right across and all around the Tłı chȯ area. And so this is where the Tłı chȯ are able to exercise most of the rights that's set out in the agreement. Next slide. This is the Wikiji area. The Wikiji area follows the hard line of the Satu boundary and the Nunavut boundary, and then cuts across into halfway to the north arm of Great Slave Lake, and then across to the other side. So this is the resource management area. So this is where the Wikiji Land and Water Board and the Wikiji Renewable Resource, their management authority apply in this area. Just so that people might not know, but the Wikiji Land and Water Board issues water licenses and land use permits for development. Satu and the Gwich'in also have land and water boards. Next slide. And so Tłı chȯ lands is quite massive. It's 39,000 square kilometers in fee simple title, surface, subsurface ownership. So fee simple title is the highest form of ownership you can have in land. And so the Tłı chȯ own this huge tract of land. And in 2005, when the Tłı chŏ government started, the Tłı chŏ lands was placed in moratorium, meaning that nothing was to happen on that land. And since then, land use plan has been developed for this whole area. And the four communities you see there, we call them donut holes. What that means is that the community government, which is a municipal body, own the municipal lands in those communities. So that's why we call them donut holes. And then where you see that green area, that's a refuge area, meaning that there's a historical event that happened, and so the Tłı chŏ people fled to that area and were protected. And so that area is a refuge area now, and it's protected from development by an ordering council. Next slide. Um, the chart you see here, we just did this when we were doing some fiscal renewal relationship work. We wanted to point out Tłı chŏ lands, how big it is, and what kind of resources we're going to need to administer the size of this land. And so New Brunswick is so Tłı chå lands is about 78% the size of New Brunswick, and it's about almost half the size of Nova Scotia, and it's about 6 times the size of Prince Edward Island. Next slide. And so I'm going to go briefly into the Tłı chå Constitution. We have a constitution. It's a little red book. It's on Tłı chå website, tłıchå.ca, and it's a mighty little book because it's Tłı chå Nation's highest law. It provides for the establishment of Tłı chå governing bodies and the exercise of the rights, duties, and composition, membership, and procedures. It also provides for political and financial accountability. It provides for the challenges to the validity of Tłı chå laws and decisions made by leaders. It's also a protection for the Tłı chå citizens, and it's an opportunity for non-Tłı chå to participate. It also lays out the processes for how amendments to the Tłı chå Constitution and the agreement is made. This constitution was worked on by elders, and so the elders worked on this document for a number of years. Next slide. And so the Tłı chå Constitution lays out what the purpose of the Tłı chå government is. Basically, is to act in the best interests of the Tłı chå, to respect all laws, including Tłı chå laws, acting to preserve, protect, and promote the Aboriginal and treaty rights and way of life, including Tłı chå cultural, language, heritage, lands, economy, and resources for all Tłı chå today and for future generations to come for as long as the land shall last. So that's really the main purpose of Tłı chå government. Next slide. So this is where the structure of Tłı chå government comes in. Again, as I said, it's not laid out in the agreement, but the Constitution kind of lays it out, and I'll be going through each of these. First, we have the annual gathering, then the Tłı chå Assembly, the Chief's Executive Council, and then the Tłı chå Executive Officer. So the Tłı chå Executive Officer is the highest administrative position within the Tłı chå government. It's seen as a chief executive officer, or however way, those senior administrative officer. So rather than calling it a chief executive officer, we call it the Tłı chå Executive Officer. And there are 8 departments under that position, and each department has a director. So Department of Client Services deals with training, employment, and economic development, victim services, and that. Department of Corporate Services is the financial arm of Tłı chå government, and HR is under them. Department of Culture and Lands Protection is pretty straightforward. They deal with all the lands and the MUFI, within MUFI as well. Department of Healing and Community Wellness, they deal with a lot of social issues in our community, on the land healing and sending people out for treatment and that. Department of Early Childhood deals with daycare centers and family resources and dealing with the early childhood. Governance mostly deals with assembly, a person that deals with assembly, and I'll explain that. We have Department of Infrastructure and then Planning and Partnership. So planning and partnership, they deal with doing strategic planning for Tłı chȯ government plus dealing with intergovernmental relations and all negotiations and the mining or industry, relationships with industry. Next slide. Just so people might be aware, we passed a budget this past week, and I think our budget for this coming year is 140 million, and I think we have about 140 full-time staff. So it's a pretty big government. So according to the Constitution, we have our annual gathering. We've been having annual gatherings every year as a people. And this is a time where people get together from their traditional family areas throughout the traditional territory, and people come together to exchange stories and ideas, and marriages are arranged, and they talk about what their year was like, their hunting and trapping and things like that. And so we continue to do that. We don't call it annual general assembly. It's an annual gathering of Tłı chȯ people. And so this is where we get together to share in our social, political, and cultural activities, as well as deal with other matters. So this is where the Tłı chȯ citizens can ask questions of its government. And every 4 years, we do nominations at the annual gathering for the Grand Chief. And we also report every year on our financial activities. So every household in the Fort community gets a copy of the Tłı chȯ government's audit financial statements. And all our institutions do their presentations, like our corporate arm and other entities. Next slide. The way the Tłı chȯ government is structured is that we have a Tłı chȯ assembly, and it's based on equal representation from the 4 communities. So the assembly is the lawmaking body of the Tłı chȯ government. This is where laws get passed, budgets get approved, audit financial statements get approved, and they pass regulations and directives. And so there's 13 members on the assembly. That includes the Grand Chief, the 4 chiefs, 1 from each community, and 8 counselors. So each community government selects 2 counselors to be appointed to the assembly. And the assembly meets 5 times a year. One of them is always at the annual gathering. And so the responsibility and authority lies with the assembly to implement the agreement. They don't necessarily do the work themselves, but through the creation of laws in the departments and delegation to the chiefs and then delegation from the chiefs to the directors to make sure that the agreement is implemented properly. It also is there to make sure that we have good government. It's to protect and ensure good government. Canada is really famous for its good governments, POG, peace, order, and good government. It also is to make sure that we protect Tłı chȯ rights, title, and interests. And again, they can make laws pursuant to the self-governing powers that's listed in Chapter 7. Next slide. And so underneath the assembly, as I said, is the Chief's Executive Council. We call it the CEC. The CEC implements the laws and delegated authority from the assembly. And so members are the Grand Chief and the 4 Tłı chȯ chiefs. And they're similar to cabinet, so that people understand. And so they take direction from a report regularly to the assembly. They make sure that they ensure the implementation of Tłı chȯ laws. They oversee the management and administration of the Tłı chȯ assembly. So the Tłı chȯ assembly kind of is similar to a legislature, but a typical legislature have its own speaker that's an elected body person with full authority, and they have all kinds of staff, and it's usually a separate entity from the government. But here, because we're really small, the elders in their wisdom drafting the Constitution says that it's really the CEC that will be responsible for that. So again, we strive to make decisions by consensus, both at the CEC and at the assembly level. Next slide. And so one of the things that's really unique to the Tłı chǫ is the Grand Chief. The chiefs don't get elected at the Tłı chŏ government level. This is done through the municipal body, and I'll explain that. And so the Grand Chief is successor to Mufi, who signed Treaty 11 in 1921. That's what our elders have told us, and that's the way we are structured. And so the Grand Chief provides overall political leadership for the Tłı chŏ Nation and is the spokesperson, as well as this position, the person shall take appropriate actions to achieve the purpose of Tłı chŏ government. So if when you go back to the previous slide, what the purpose is, so this person is to make sure that that no, just go back to the Grand Chief, but but um, the person is to make sure that actions are taken to promote the fundamental principles of this Constitution. Next slide. So the responsibility of chiefs in the communities is, I just listed a whole bunch of them. It's not exhaustive. It's a whole bunch of other things can be added. But the chiefs, the role of the chiefs is not mentioned in the Constitution. They're part of the CEC and the Assembly. But because we don't have band councils anymore, we have Tłı chŏ government that's a national regional government. And so what is the presence of Tłı chȯ government in the community? So we created what we call presence office. And so the chief is really works out of the presence office for the Tłı chȯ government. So the chief of a community serves two roles, and I'll go through that. But under the Tłı chȯ government at the presence office, each presence office has a community director. That is sort of the chief's right-hand person in that community for the Tłı chȯ government. And so each chief has an office. They have a community director, but the community director reports under the governance structure as one of the 8 departments. It's a full-time position. And each office has a receptionist and an executive assistant, not to the chief, but to the community director. And one of the things that's really unique to the Tłı chȯ is that we have gawus, which is the traditional foreman. They organize all our community cultural events, for example, hand games, hunting, feasts, and whatever cultural activity on the land activity that we do. They organize search and rescues and all of that. And so we appoint as chiefs 2 cultural foremen to work with us for the duration of our term. And so right now, my 2 cultural foremen working closely with the community director. They're out on a community hunt. And so, and the next week, starting on Thursday, we're having our big NWT's biggest hand game tournament. And so they're going to be back in time to continue working on that as well. And so they work closely with the community director. And so the chief of under Tłı chȯ government, not only working with the Grand Chief as part of CEC and the Assembly, we deal with all of the issues in our community that's under our agreement. And so the chiefs are full-time position, and I've just listed some of these things here so people can understand what Tłı chȯ chiefs work on and deal with on a day-to-day basis in our communities. Not just, as I said, not just with our community, but working for the nation through the CEC and the Assembly. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through this case, but there was a case in 2009 where a law that was passed by the Assembly was challenged. So they were saying that the law that was passed was ultra vires, meaning that the Assembly didn't have authority to pass that law. But the court recognized that the Tłı chȯ government is an order of government in Canada. And so the court cannot disregard the Constitution approved by the people that set out processes for challenging the validity of a law. So basically, the court people shouldn't be using the court's procedure, that people need to follow what our Constitution says. If there's a decision made that's affecting them, impacting them directly, then they can challenge that, and there's a process for that. So, but this case recognized the Tłı chŏ government as an order of government in Canada. Next slide. And so this is another case in 2016 where a person was seeking relief, that the Assembly has these rules of order to follow. It's a procedural document, right? And saying that rules of order should be approved by the people by 3 annual gatherings before it's considered in force. This person wanted the court to require transparency and accountability from the department, employees, and contractors. And he claimed that his rights were violated under the Constitution, Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, Human Rights Act. But the court basically says there's no requirement in the Constitution for rules of orders to be approved, that the court cannot impose itself on these things. And so that by seeking relief through this process, the court said that's not a proper cause of action. But basically what the court said is that courts are always deferential in dealing with decision-making processes of other bodies, and specifically when dealing with self-government agreements. So the court is saying that the courts will always make sure that, in our case, that that not making sure that we follow our process, but we do have a constitution that, because we're an order of government, we have a constitution that the courts will always be respectful of that. And so they'll always make sure that you know, people can judicially challenge decisions, right? And so there's a process that needs to be respected when it comes to those things. You can't just always go to court for something you disagree with or don't like. Next slide. So just quickly dealing with treaty partners, intergovernmental relations. Next slide. So over the years, we've been making sure that we work with other land claim bodies in Canada. One of them is the Land Claims Agreement Coalition. We just say LCAC. And so this coalition, we work together to make sure that land claims agreements and associated agreements are respected, honored, and fully implemented. And basically, it was formed in 2003. More than about modern treaties affect nearly half of Canada's land, waters, and resources. About 40% of Canada lands are under land claim agreements. When you take Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon and other parts of Canada, so it's pretty massive. Next slide. And so the Land Claims Agreement Coalition, the leadership meets once a year. We just met last week in Ottawa. And so they do approve work for the technical working group that meets once a month. And we all pay fees to help this coalition to work. We do have a contracting consulting firm to coordinate all our work. There are 2 co-chairs, an Inuit and a First Nation co-chair. They pass a 410 declaration. Again, when you check up their website, you can get all these documents. And we have a national conference that was held last year, and they're working on one for 2027. I think they have it every 2nd or 3rd year. It's very well attended. Next slide. And so one of the things that we're working on when we have because we have a financing agreement with Canada to fund self-government, we've been working together with other self-governing bodies. So we just call ourselves SGIGs. There's other self-government groups in Canada that have like self-government over programs and that. These are that's not the kind of self-government we're talking about. these are self-governing Indigenous governments that are exercising authority over all kinds of areas. So there are 26 self-governing nations in Canada right now. We all have financing agreement with Canada. We started working with Canada a few years ago on how they're going to fund self-government, and it's an expenditure-based approach and not a formula-driven like bank councils. We develop a fiscal model that we're using right now, and so Canada, we collaboratively work with Canada to draft their policy on how they're going to fund self-government, and so the policy was approved by cabinet, and so the policy has what we call these buckets. We did come up with funding for core and interim funding for land, so we're getting all of that funding now. We're working on language infrastructure, and there's another one that I forget right now. I can't think. We got GABS funding, closing the GABS funding, and we did a housing allocation budget in budget 2022 and 2023. So Tłı chŏ government got like 86 million for housing under this work, under the fiscal work. Next slide. So with Government of Canada, there was a cabinet directive that was issued where they created this Deputy Minister Oversight Committee, DMOC we call it, where any issues we have with our land claim agreement, we can go and talk to the deputy ministers. They also created a modern treaty implementation office. Again, back on that fiscal policy, the cabinet approved that, so we're operating and working under that. We do meet with the Prime Minister once a year as Indigenous self-governing bodies and land claim bodies. And we've been advocating to have a modern treaty commissioner, so that legislation is going through Parliament right now. We collaboratively drafted the implementation policy of our land claims agreement with Canada that was approved, and a whole bunch of other engagements here and there. Next slide. And because we have an agreement, a tripartite agreement, our other treaty partners are the government of the Northwest Territories, and I'll just briefly go over some of the things that we've created over the years. One of them, all the Indigenous governments in Northwest Territories have bilateral agreements with the cabinet. And so the Tłı chŏ, the Chiefs Executive Council meets with cabinet twice a year. We're working on our agenda items for our next upcoming meeting in May right now. One of the things that happened in the Northwest Territories is that there was a devolution. Canada has public lands and commissioners' lands, and all the administration of that land was transferred over to the GNWT in 2014. And so there's an agreement where the Indigenous governments that sign on to devolution, there's an agreement in place, and the leadership meets once a year to talk about lands and resources issues and co-drafting of GNWT legislation. The third table that we have with them is self-government and land claim bodies. And so those of us that have land claims and self-government in Northwest Territories, we do meet with GNWT on issues that concerns all of us pertaining to our agreement. Another table that we have is the NWT Council of Leaders. So this is the leaders up and down the Mackenzie Valley. We sit down with GNWT once a year or twice a year. And this is what we call the social envelope table. So this is where we talk about climate change, mental health, housing, addictions, and UNDRIP. We co-drafted territorial UNDRIP legislation. And so this is where we do all of that. And we get together to talk about how we're going to engage with Canada on a whole bunch of priority issues for the Northwest Territories. Next slide. As I said, the Tłı chŏ community governments in our agreement, there's under Chapter 8, community governments are the municipal government body in the community. And so this is where the chief wears two hats. And this is where the election for the chief and council happens under territorial legislation. And it's the first, second Monday of June every 4 years. And we just had our election in 2025. And so I'm like a little 6 months, 7 months into my term. But the agreement sets that out under Chapter 8. And it's a territorial legislation, as I said. And so, next slide. So that's I'm almost done my presentation here, but um, one of the things that we just did as newly elected assembly, Tłı chȯ Assembly, um, for a 4-year term, we had a workshop in October 2025 where we talked about where do we want to be as a nation. And so we came out with a 50-year vision statement. So by 2075, the Tłı chȯ nation will be a strong, self-sustaining, and united people, deeply rooted in our culture, language, culture, and traditions while thriving in a modern world. So that's the vision statement that we came out with. Next slide. And so we envision a future where Tłı chȯ is strong, our youth are empowered, our communities are healthy and safe, we are economically self-sufficient and locally driven, our governance is Tłı chȯ-led, inclusive, and accountable, our land is protected and respected, our infrastructure reflects Tłı chȯ, our spirit is strong. So each of these that there's writings on there, how we're going to do that. Next slide. And so basically we are committed to working together across generations and communities, listening to each other, building a future where every Tłı chȯ citizen is proud, supported, and thriving. We are strong like two people. We are Tłı chȯ. So one of the things that our education system here, the mission statement is that we are strong like two people, meaning that we are thriving in our traditional economy, in our traditional way of life, our language, our culture. Meanwhile, we're also functioning in the modern non-Tłı chȯ world. And so we strongly believe in being strong like two people. Next slide. So the Tłı chȯ Assembly in their as I said in October, we came out with our priorities for the next 4 years. One is to be economic self-sufficiency, which is to make sure, which also includes advancing the Arctic Economic Security Corridor. I'm sure a lot of people are hearing about that. Canada has come out with Build Canada Strong and identifying projects of national interest. And so we want to make sure we advance this economic security corridor. This is the road to Nunavut. The second area is infrastructure, including housing and implementing the Tłı chȯ Regional Infrastructure Plan. We do have an infrastructure plan. The third one is healing and wellness, addressing drug and alcohol through on-the-land healing, advancing the development of a treatment center, creating a drug task force, and supporting staff to be healthy and strong. And the last one is to building capacity. We want to increase Tłı chȯ education and training and development for citizens and staff, including by working with external agencies, creating mentorship and internship opportunities, strengthening knowledge of Tłı chȯ self-governance, and creating a youth council. So these are our priorities as a Tłı chȯ Assembly for the next 4 years. Next slide, and that's the last one. So as next step, the Tłı chȯ government will develop a government plan to outline how these priorities can be advanced over the next 4 years. So this plan will be published this spring and presented at the annual gathering, which will be held in July in Wati. And so the priorities were developed to advance the 50-year vision established by Tłı chȯ citizens through engagement this year. So the Department of Planning and Partnership put a engagement plan and executed it and engaged as much citizens as they could. And so this is how we ended up with developing our 50-year vision and our priorities for the next 4 years. Next slide. That ends my presentation and questions with, I think, I don't know how much time we have left.
Thank you so much, Bertha. We have some time for questions. We welcome questions in the chat. And yeah, it was amazing. I learned so much. It's like so grateful to have you here with us today. It's so cool learning so much about an Indigenous government in the Northwest Territories. And yeah, thank you so much and having you with us today. From your lawyer and leadership background, do you have any guidance for how young people can learn how to read these agreements or learn about Tłı chȯ government governance from Marlisa?
Uh, um, I know reading the agreement can be pretty daunting. So I think like one of our priorities is to make the citizens more aware of our agreement and the governance. And so they used to have classes before or courses before, and so we're hoping to revive that. But um, like I've been doing these presentations for over 20 years, presenting on Tłı chȯ government and that. And so the more information we bring out there, I think like we really need our people to understand. A lot of our young people have grown up, it's been 20 years. A lot of our people, young people, are grown up in the age of Tłı chȯ government. They don't understand bank councils. They don't. The older people do, but not the young people. And so we need to, yeah, for sure, we need to do a better job of teaching our people about Tłı chȯ governance. I know that didn't answer your question, but um, because the agreement is out there, it's online, right? I'll show you my book. Just wait. This is my book. It's it's pretty tattered. I had to collate it because it was just falling apart, but everything is like, you know, I've written on it, I've highlighted it, I've put sticky stuff on it so that I keep myself informed. It's a living, breathing document, right? And so um, uh, we did a plain speak of it before, like a plain speak version, and maybe we might need to do that again.
Yeah, with treaty talks, we did our strategic planning over a month ago, and our vision has pretty much stayed the same for the past 5 years. Help condense our agreements and treaties, final agreements. And I have a question for you. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through this and for offering a perspective that feels genuinely lived. What inspired you to step into leadership or advocacy work around Indigenous rights or governance?
Um, I've always had this love for social justice. And, when you see injustice happening to people, to young children, and the poverty that you see and how you can help. If you're in a position to help, um, you know, you should do it. And so I used to grow up and see young children, not having mitts in the winter. I would give them my mitts because I had an extra pair. And so just that innate sense of wanting to always help people and and trying to be now that I know what it is, having compassionate curiosity about people and their lives and where they're coming from and understanding that and how do I help. And so, growing up, I've always when I was in elementary, grade 5, actually, I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I knew what that meant. But to getting there was a long road. And so for me, to understand what Indigenous, what it is, and to exercise those rights and authorities, um, is something that I've always been curious about. And so I did take political science and Indigenous studies at university, understanding about governance and how governance operate and decisions they make and how that impact people and the policies, right? On the bigger picture level, making those changes there to improve people's lives. And so when I decided to run for chief, it was really to make sure that the people of Behchokǫ are heard and that their voice matter and everybody, like whether they're on the streets or not, they matter and they need help. And so if I'm in a position to be able to do that, then that's what I wanted to do. And so at the end of the day, it's not about me as a person, and it's about the people. And so yeah, a sense of social justice and wanting to do what's right for the people. I think sometimes to your own detriment that you would sometimes, yeah, just it's for the people. What can I say?
I see, Bertha, if there's no more questions, I want to thank you so much again for joining us. And we'll take a few minute break before we move into Nolan Kamanuk's presentation, our wonderful team member.
Wow, Masi Cho, Bertha, this was such an incredible presentation to listen in on.
Well, thank you for inviting me, asking me, and I wasn't sure how it would roll out, but I hope the presentation was informative, and I'm available by phone, by email, text. I got Messenger. People could always contact me, ask questions.
Thank you so much. We still have about another minute. We have a question in the chat about what do you think about what's happening in Alberta from Laureen?
It's scary. That's all I can say because um, we live in an age where social media, people are harnessing that and create fear, and all of that. This whole right wing um, is really the ideologies. And I'm a liberal. I've been a liberal all my life. And I believe in, like I said, social justice and rights of people and that. But also, I strongly believe that collectively we need to be um, together to protect what we have, right? But but when you bring religion in and far right views on those things, then that's not really how traditional governance used to be, in my view. And so when people start mixing religion and politics, it can be a nasty mix and a scary mix, and that's what's really going on.
Thank you so much again, Osicho, Bertha. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care.
Must see.